Tonight at 10, Russia launches a major new offensive in Syria, escalating its campaign against groups opposed to President Assad. For the first time, missiles are fired from a Russian aircraft carrier, targeting what Moscow calls terrorist training camps. As Syrian government forces bombard Aleppo, President Assad said tonight that the US president-elect Donald Trump could be a natural ally.
If he's going to fight the terrorists, of course we're going to be ally, natural ally in that regard, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with many other countries.
Tonight, America has condemned the latest bombing. Also on the program, the High Court forces prison officers back to work after a walkout over rising violence in jails. Google announces 3,000 new jobs in Britain and up to £1 billion of investment, saying Brexit isn't a problem.
I'm addicted to heroin.
America's drug epidemic. We have a special report on the heroin crisis devastating communities across the country.
The drug they call the devil has hit hardest in small-town America, taking hold in areas like this that have already been ravaged by years of economic decline.
And England draw against Spain in Gareth Southgate's final match as temporary manager.
And here in the south, cash for the classroom, the parents dipping into their own pockets to plug a school's funding shortfall. And the delay in criminal record checks that's leaving Roz without her carer.
I'm not going to put the book in.
Good evening. Russia and forces loyal to President Assad have launched major new offensives in Syria. Government aircraft have attacked the northern city of Aleppo for the first time in 3 weeks, while the Russians targeted what they claim are terrorist training camps in the provinces of Idlib and Homs. The US has condemned Russia's role in the bombing. And tonight, Syria's President Assad has made his first public comments about America's new president-elect. He said Donald Trump would be a natural ally if he fulfills his pledge to fight terrorists. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins.
Look closely and you can see what appear to be parachute bombs falling on Aleppo. After weeks of relative calm, the besieged city is again under attack, part of a wide new offensive by President Assad and his Russian allies to crush all resistance. As Syrian White Helmet rescuers responded once again, these teams are funded by Western governments. Moscow swiftly denied any involvement in today's strikes on the city. Its previous bombing here was widely condemned. Instead, Russia is trumpeting the fact that its flagship aircraft carrier Kuznetsov is now in combat, launching airstrikes Russia says are targeting jihadists in the Syrian provinces of Idlib and Homs. President Vladimir Putin, hours after his first phone conversation with President-elect Trump, was being briefed by his military chiefs.
For the first time in the history of Russia's naval forces, an aircraft carrier, Admiral Kuznetsov, took part in combat operations. Today, Su-33 jets were flying from the carrier.
Russia has been firing cruise missiles too, launched from a frigate. As well as land-based missiles, the Defence Ministry say have been hitting ammunition stores. All part of a strategy to make real gains in Syria while the US government is in transition. In the war for control of Syria, Aleppo has become critical. It was once Syria's largest city and the country's industrial centre. But since 2012, it's been a key battleground of the civil war. The city is divided. Broadly, the government side controls the west. The rebels are hanging on in eastern Aleppo. The UN estimates there are still over 250,000 civilians there. It looks as if President Putin hopes that retaking Aleppo will tip the wider war decisively in President Assad's favour. And after speaking to Donald Trump, he seems to believe that the next American president will be less hostile.
Once he's inaugurated, he has to make a choice and make it very quickly. What kind of support will he give the rebels? What sort of support will he give the Kurds? How hard will he press against Raqqa?
About what he's going to do.
But Syria's President Assad is already seizing on the uncertainty, telling Portuguese television tonight he sees Donald Trump as a potential ally, not a foe.
If he's going to fight the terrorists, of course we're going to be ally, natural ally in that regard, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with many other countries who wanted to defeat the terrorists.
So what is clear? A lull in attacks on Aleppo is over, a major new offensive is underway, but the war still looks like agony without end. James Robbins, BBC News.
Let's go to Moscow and our correspondent Steve Rosenberg, who's there. Steve, should we read anything into the timing of Moscow's latest offensive in Syria?
Well, I think the military offensive itself is no surprise. The Russians have been building up their forces in the eastern Mediterranean quite substantially in recent weeks. But the timing is very interesting because the offensive began just hours after Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump talked on the phone. We don't have all the details of that conversation. We do know they talked about Syria. We know they talked about combining efforts to fight international terrorism. I don't think we should read too much into the fact that there were no Russian airstrikes on Aleppo today. A senior member of the Russian Parliament's Defence Committee said he thought that at some point Russian air power would be used to, as he put it, clear Aleppo of terrorists. But it is clear that the Russians truly believe that very soon there's going to be a US president who talks the same talk as they do about fighting terrorism, an American leader who they believe they can find common ground with on Syria and on other international issues. And if they're right, that is an astonishing change for US-Russian relations.
OK, Steve, thanks for that. Steve Rosenberg there in Moscow. Thousands of prison officers walked off the job today in England and Wales, despite strike action being illegal. The Prison Officers Association says it's determined to highlight a steep rise in violence in jails. The industrial action meant several court cases had to be adjourned, including the trial of the man accused of murdering the MP Joe Cox. But eventually, the government won a High Court injunction against the walkout. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly has more.
Pentonville Jail and prison officers, normally at work on the inside, were outside as part of this national protest. For weeks, the Prison Officers Association has been warning that the system is at breaking point. Thousands of its members walked out, leaving only emergency cover. It's staffing levels which are at the heart of this dispute. Recently, the Justice Secretary, Liz Truss, announced an extra 2,500 prison officers would be recruited, but they won't all be in place until 2018. The Prison Officers Association says the consequences of current staff shortages need to be addressed now.
Assaults are up 43% on prison officers and 32% on prisoners. That's not sustainable. We cannot carry on. This prison service is in crisis at the minute.
This was Bedford Jail recently. Footage passed to the BBC demonstrates how staff lost control. And these pictures obtained by the BBC today show drugs and mobile phones said to have been smuggled into Pentonville Prison. With the help of people on the outside, inmates in many jails have been using drones to get drugs and phones in. In this case, the package was intercepted.
Get down!
The government says it's determined to cut prison violence. As well as the planned extra staff, it's announced crackdowns on gangs and organised crime and new tests to root out drugs.
I would urge the opposition front bench to join me in condemning this unlawful action and calling on the POA to withdraw this action and get back to the negotiating table.
And later, the government won an injunction outlawing the action.
In order to protect our union and our members, we will comply with the terms of that particular order by the court.
Some criminal cases were stopped for the day by the dispute. The family of the Labour MP Joe Cox arrived at the Old Bailey to learn that the man accused of her murder was one of a number of prisoners not being brought to court. Tonight, as prison officers returned to duty, their leaders maintained the walkout worked because they've won a meeting with the Justice Secretary. They say that with current staffing levels, the safety situation can only be improved if prisoners spend more time in their cells. June Kelly, BBC News.
Well, our home editor, Mark Easton, is with me now. There does seem to be some fundamental problems with the prison system and our jails at the moment. What's going on?
Well, the government would say that the real game changer has been these new psychoactive substances. June referred to them in her film. These are illegal drugs, new formulas, and the effect of them, frankly, they're causing mayhem in prison. Huge amounts are getting in, prisoners take them, and they're becoming very violent to themselves and other people. In response, as we heard, the Ministry of Justice is promising more prison officers, more money, more measures to try and deal with the drones and the mobile phones that are helping bring these drugs in. They are, of course, also in talks, pay talks and health and safety talks with the prison officers. But critics would argue that actually government policies themselves are partly to blame. You go back to 2010. Since then, there have been 7,000 fewer prison officers as a result of government policies. And pay restraint has meant that jails are really struggling to recruit people. In fact, the governors said today that they're losing more people than they can actually bring in. And it is a hugely challenging situation right now. You've got the relationship between employers and workers appears to have almost broken down. And the prison governors are tonight saying, look, the most urgent matter is simply to reduce the immediate risks right now and try and restore some calm and stability back to our jails.
OK, Mark, many thanks for that. Mark Easton there. Now, the company Google is to create 3,000 jobs over the next 4 years in Britain and invest £1 billion. The firm's chief executive told the BBC he sees lots of opportunities in the UK, and Google wasn't put off by the Brexit vote. Here's our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
There's a big kid in all of us, and today the head of Google revealed his younger side.
There's a camera in the space station.
Introducing these children at a school in London to the wonders of virtual reality and the International Space Station floating hundreds of miles above the Earth. From the lofty perspective of its present home in London, Sundar Pichai was here to announce thousands of new jobs and a new office. Decisions taken after the vote to leave the European Union.
Everything we've seen about the UK, the innovation we see here, the talent we have available here, and how on the cutting edge of technology we are able to do things here, makes it an incredible place for us to invest.
One of the concerns for big global businesses that are based in Britain is free movement of people, immigration of talent from outside Britain into Britain. What would you say to people who say that we need to control our borders more strictly?
I want to be respectful. These are important questions for the citizens of UK to answer, and I think there are thoughtful debates to be had. In our experience as a company, I think when we have been able to bring people together, and operate in an open and connected way, we build our platforms that way, we build our products that way, achieves tremendous impact over time.
Keep those borders open.
Yes.
Google is building its new headquarters here in central London, and it's an announcement that has broader significance. They're joining companies like Apple, building a new headquarters down the road in Battersea. Companies like Nissan that is committed to building a new car model in Sunderland. Whatever companies said before the referendum and the decision to leave the European Union, one thing is becoming clear. Britain is still a very attractive place to do business. There's been a lot of noise, of course, about Google's tax affairs and the amount they pay in the UK. I asked Mr. Pichai if the tech giant's reputation had been damaged.
We are happy to pay our fair share of tax. As you know, tax is a global construct. We are a multinational company in well over 100 countries, and we've advocated for comprehensive tax reform so that we can engage and get to a better place.
From London to America, Mr. Pichai, an Indian immigrant in the US running an American company. Some of the debate there is toxic. I ask him if the conversation in the country he now calls home has become nastier because of the presidential campaign.
The rhetoric for sure, definitely bothered me, as did many people during the election. but I'm hopeful. There are a lot of founding principles of what makes the U.S. the country it is, and I hope post the campaign season, as we actually move back into a governing phase, I think people will come together, and we have a lot of important problems to work through.
In Britain, a different debate. After the referendum, what will global companies make of the UK? Google has answered today loud and clear. This is a place to do business. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
It's a week now since America went to the polls, giving Donald Trump a stunning victory. But the challenges he faces at home and abroad are daunting. He's talked at length about a crisis in America's inner cities, including the devastating problem of drug addiction. It's now estimated more Americans die because of drugs than from guns or in car accidents, nearly 50,000 every year. And increasingly, the victims are young, white and middle class, addicted to heroin and strong painkillers. Well, last night we reported on the rise in heroin crossing the border from Mexico. Now, our international correspondent Ian Pannell and cameraman Darren Conway have this report on the havoc the drug is causing to countless lives. A warning, it does contain some distressing images.
A darkness has descended across America.
For a 40-year-old female, possibly not breathing, OD.
A plague of drug addiction and death greater than there's ever been. Opioid painkillers and increasingly heroin are killing more Americans than ever before.
Oh my God, what's wrong with her?
Get out of the way.
Okay.
We were dispatched here for a female in her 40s who wasn't breathing. It was apparent drug overdose.
How common is this?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day. Sometimes more than once a day. We have a dry spell where we'll go a day or two, but mostly every day we'll have a call like this.
Started when I was 17 years old. I was at a party, high school.
I started doing the pills.
When I was 13, I started using pain pills.
5, 6 people I know died just last year.
All my values and morals, they went out the window.
I mean, it'll take everything you have, all the money you have, everything you've worked for, everyone you love.
There was nothing, almost nothing that I wouldn't do for it.
Because I'm a heroin addict.
My brother is also an addict.
I mean, I know I will die if I go back home.
I've overdosed 4 times. I had my own sister have to save me.
I know that a lot of words are overused in our lexicon, historic, unprecedented, and unique. We fall back on those words all the time. Actually, in this case, this is an epidemic, and that's the right word. That is precisely what this is, an epidemic.
This crisis has spread across America, created by massive overprescription of morphine-like painkillers. It gave birth to a nation of addicts.
A heroin epidemic is sweeping across America. It respects no man or woman, whatever their creed, colour or class. Friends, families, whole communities have been left to bury the dead and deal with the devastation addiction brings. But the drug they call the devil has hit hardest in small-town America, taking hold in areas like this that have already been ravaged by years of economic decline. And for so many people, the future looks bleak.
Increasingly, addicts are young white kids from the suburbs and rural areas. They've moved from pills to heroin because it's cheaper and easier to get. But it's far more deadly, and it's no exaggeration to say this generation's under threat.
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
Dr. Huckabee's the medical director here. He's an expert on pain medication and what it does. He's also a recovering addict who became hooked after getting pain pills for a broken foot.
The needle tears a hole, the old familiar sting. I was given the oxycodone. It was like pulling the trigger. I could not turn it loose. It tickled my brain in such profound ways that it totally blindsided me to the point that I eventually was injecting my own fentanyl in the operating room and was fortunate to have partners who intervened upon me and helped me.
You were injecting yourself?
Yes.
And just
powerless over it. promise myself all the time, we're not going to do this again. That we're not going to do this again today. And by the end of the day, just couldn't control it. It's a real hopeless feeling. I remember feeling at one time that, this is my fate in life. I'm just going to die from this.
I'm addicted to heroin.
I've about died 6 times.
All I could think about is, when am I gonna get some more? To feel better, but I'm never feeling better. I'm tired of this.
And I remember the first time I OD'd, and my boyfriend was actually filming me. And he brought me back, and right after that he went and did a shot, and it was just kind of like, wow, like, I just almost died.
It is absolutely everywhere, in every town every town around here at least, there's somebody that sells drugs, and it's predominantly heroin, because that's the big thing around here.
In the streets and strip malls of western Pennsylvania, heroin's taken root. The journey through addiction is a long, dark one for so many. Steve Ashbaugh has been trying to get clean for years, but shaking it without serious long-term help is rare.
One says you can get it, but it's right in the middle of the hood, and I don't like going over there, period, let alone at midnight.
Steve's trapped in an endless hunt for a high that'll never be enough. For something his body craves that he knows he shouldn't do. Because there's no way to know what's in each packet and whether or not it'll kill you.
Shit's gotten a hold of me. I'm obsessed with it. It runs my life.
Heroin's addictive like no other drug, and for many there are only 2 ways out: rehab or death. Today, the victim is just as likely to be your friend, your neighbor, or even your child.
I miss you so much. I miss you so much. I held him first on February 11th, 1994. And then I held him last on August 22nd, 2015. And I never want a parent to ever have to do that. It's the hardest thing that you'll ever do. There's nothing else you could do to us that will hurt like this. Oh, that should never be.
But this epidemic's only getting worse. There'll be more families devastated and more lives lost. Ian Pannell, BBC News, Western Pennsylvania.
And you can see more of that report in Our World, American Addiction, on Saturday and Sunday on the BBC News channel. That's at 9:30 in the evening, and it'll also be available on the BBC iPlayer. Now let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories. And President Obama has warned of a rise in a crude sort of nationalism following the Brexit vote and the US presidential election. He was speaking in Greece on his final foreign trip as president. He also put the victory of Donald Trump down to the view of the American people to just shake things up. The full scale of the damage done by Islamic State militants to the historic city of Nimrud in northern Iraq is emerging. Government forces recaptured the site 2 days ago as part of a drive towards the city of Mosul. The UN called the destruction at the time a war crime. A 17-year-old boy has admitted hacking offences linked to a cyber attack last year on the telecoms firm TalkTalk. Thousands of customers had their bank account details stolen. The boy, who appeared in court in Norwich but can't be named for legal reasons, said he was just showing off to friends. And the former Conservative MP Harvey Proctor says he's considering taking legal action against the Metropolitan Police for its investigation into false claims of child sex abuse made against him. He's already received an apology from the Met, but says he's suffered intolerable stress and strain over the allegations. Now, there's been a slight fall in inflation. Latest official figures suggest the rate, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, fell below 1% in September. Well, our economics correspondent Andy Verity is at the Bank of England for us now. Andy, no one saw this coming, did they?
Not at all, Clive. In fact, most economists, including the Bank of England behind me, thought that inflation would rise and keep on rising. It hasn't. It's dipped. The reason they thought it would rise, very simple. Since the referendum and even before it, there's been a big fall in the value of the pound. It's lost round about a quarter to a fifth of its value. And that should mean that companies, when they buy their goods abroad in dollars or euros, well, they need more pounds to get those dollars or euros to get those goods. That's a higher cost to them, one which all the economists would expect them to pass on to us, to the consumers. Why aren't they doing that? Because they're not doing it like they were expected to. Well, the Bank of England's answer is competition. It's like a game of chicken. Whoever flinches first and raises their prices will lose customers to the competition. So it's not getting passed on yet, but you can expect inflation to get higher next year.
OK, Andy Verity there at the Bank of England. Thanks, Andy. Now, the government has published its preferred route for the HS2 high-speed rail line from Birmingham, then on to Manchester and Leeds. But some details are still to be confirmed, including whether trains will stop in Sheffield city centre. The line won't open for another 17 years. Here's our transport correspondent, Richard Westcott.
The HS2 route cuts through every corner of English life. Through the countryside and farms, to villages and small towns, it'll eventually link our biggest cities. Today, another milestone for the project, the government's proposed route for the northern half of the line.
The benefits it brings to the economies of the Midlands and the North, not just through better transport links, not just through more capacity on the existing railway lines, but also through the creation of jobs and apprenticeships, a new college to develop specialist skills in Doncaster and in Birmingham. This will make a real difference to the economy of the Midlands and the North, and that's why we need it.
The route to the west of Birmingham links Crewe with new stations at Manchester Airport and Manchester City Centre. To the east, there's a new station between Derby and Nottingham, then on to Leeds. Journey times from London to Manchester will be cut by an hour and to Leeds by 49 minutes. But there's still uncertainty over what happens south of Sheffield. Like here in Mexborough near Doncaster. This farm's been home to the Schofield family for the past 40 years. Now the line might cut right through it.
When my dad's dreamed from 8-year-old to own a farm and look after his family and set his family up. I am not moving anywhere. I'll fight this till death. It's there's no money, no compensation can replace the memories and the work that we've got on here.
But across the country, a different view.
All you need to do is pull up.
In Oldham, Craig runs a business developing software for the travel industry.
HS2 is a vital part of rebalancing the national economy and making sure that as an economy we're not just focused on the centre of London, that we're focused throughout the nation and particularly in the north. And ultimately that's good for any business. It's not just good for my business, it's good for all businesses.
It's called High Speed 2, but there's nothing quick about building it. Even if it is approved, trains won't be racing through here for another 17 years. Richard Westcott, BBC News, Mexborough, near Doncaster.
Gareth Southgate's temporary tenure as England football manager came to an end tonight, and to be sure of securing the job permanently, he needed a good performance against mighty Spain. Well, Joe Wilson watched all the action for us now. Joe, over to you.
If you get lost looking for Wembley, you could find yourself here. London N14. The entertainment's just down the road. The ringmaster, the manager, appearing for one more night only? Well, Gareth Southgate took on Spain, trying to prove he's the best option, not simply the only option. There were players with points to prove too. Jamie Vardy given a chance to start. Now Spain were furious about this. No card was shown. Vardy would soon interest the referee again.
And here's Jamie Vardy.
He couldn't quite control the ball to shoot, but the next best thing is a penalty. The goalkeeper, not booked, Pepe Reina, once of Liverpool. The penalty taker, Adam Lallana, currently of Liverpool. And for England, increasingly influential.
Comfortably done.
Contract negotiations were going well. There was a time when Jamie Vardy couldn't stop scoring. This season the goals had dried up, but there he was, and now he couldn't stop stopping. Mannequins. If only the game had stopped then. Instead, England threw away the win. 89 minutes, Aspas passed Heaton in the England goal. And then in the 5th minute of injury time, Isco the equaliser to snatch disappointment from the jaws of joy. Well, that's England management.
Well, do friendly results matter? Maybe not. That's certainly, I think, the word in Belfast this evening. Northern Ireland, unusually, lost a match at home. It was a friendly against Croatia. Final score, a 3-0 defeat for Northern Ireland. Mind you, they were fielding an experimental team. As for Gareth Southgate here at Wembley, well, he's just said that he's loving doing the job. He thought it was a very special performance by England tonight. But he still has no idea when England will tell him he's got the permanent job officially. He says, Clive, it's a pressing issue, not least because he knows, well, he wants to know where he's going to park his car. He's still smiling. That's a good sign.
Indeed. Joe, thanks for that. Joe Wilson there at Wembley. Now, Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two. Here's James O'Brien.
Tonight, from Republican West Virginia to Democrat California, how Donald Trump's election victory is changing the way people think about America. Join me now on BBC Two or at 11 p.m. in Scotland.
And that's it from us here on BBC One. It's time for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.